Good morning, everyone, and many thanks for joining this presentation on the impact of COVID-19 on the automation and robotics industry. I would like to thank the organizers of this Automation and Robotics Summit for asking me to speak here today. If you do have any questions, please feel free to ask them at the end of the presentation, and I will do my best to answer them. By way of introduction, my name is Brian Cooney, and I am the General Manager for KUKA Robotics Ireland, based in Dundalk, County Louth. So today's presentation is about the impact of COVID-19 on the automation and robotics industry, what the longer term effects may be, and indeed where some post-COVID-19 opportunities might lie. In terms of the agenda, I will begin with some big numbers, followed by an overview of the sectors that are relevant to the automation and robotics market. I will then look a little deeper into some of the main sectors and the effects COVID-19 is having on them and the global supply chain. I will then explore where there might be some post-COVID-19 opportunities and finish up with an overview of the challenges and barriers that will exist for companies attempting to restructure their businesses in the new norm for manufacturing. So let me start by presenting some big numbers that highlight the seriousness of the impact that COVID-19 has had on some global economies, but also on our own local economy here in Ireland. $26.8 trillion or 5.3% is a projection of the possible losses to global GDP in the coming 5 years as a direct result of COVID-19 and as indicated by Cambridge University's Centre for Risk Studies. 39 million. This is the number of newly unemployed in the USA in a period of only 9 weeks from the coronavirus pandemic hit and the lockdown began. 27.2% is the amount that capex investment in automotive fell by in China in Q1. And when you combine that with a fall of 15% in electronics, the resulting impact to robot sales in China alone amounted to a fall of almost 17% when compared to Q1 in 2019. 28.2% is the unemployment rate in Ireland at the end of April, which was a jump of 23.5% from an all-time low of 4.7% before the COVID-19 pandemic, and that was pretty much full employment. Even with people returning to work today and even with a strong post-COVID-19 recovery, the unemployment rate is still predicted to be at about 10% by the year end. Another 10%, this 10% is the predicted contraction in the Irish economy in 2020. 20 to 30%. Automation and robotics companies are experiencing drops in orders of between 20 and 30% year to date and predict losses in 2020 to be in the region of 8 to 10% directly due to COVID-19 and in the main due to contraction in the automotive and electronics markets. This is in stark contrast to the expected growth of 10% that was predicted for the robotics market in 2020. 4.3 billion euro. So why is this big number in blue? Well, because interestingly enough, and while it might be difficult to find good news in the current pandemic, not all manufacturing sectors are suffering. And Irish exports in March rose by 4.3 billion euro, though this is mainly resulting from medical and pharmaceutical exports aimed at combating COVID-19. So let's have a look at the focus markets for automation and robotics companies. The picture you see here illustrates the main focus manufacturing sectors for automation and robotics companies worldwide. I won't comment on e-mobility or battery or entertainment sectors since they have little relevance to the Irish market, although some of our tier 1 manufacturing companies do make subcomponents for the e-mobility market. Globally, the two biggest markets are automotive and electronics. And while tier 1 automotive and some electronic sectors do figure here to some extent, the main areas for us here in Ireland are in consumer goods, which includes the food and beverage sector and personal care products, healthcare, which includes life sciences with medical device, pharmaceutical and biopharma manufacturing, metal, although we tend to usually group this under the term general industry, and includes metal fabrication, machine shops, surface finishing amongst others. And what might be surprising to some is quite a strong aerospace sector, manufacturing parts for many of the main aircraft manufacturers, including Airbus, Boeing and Bombardier, which of course is now owned by Airbus and the government of Quebec. Logistics, e-commerce and retail are also important sectors for automation and robotics globally, though to a lesser extent in Ireland. That may well change post-COVID-19. In recent years, there has been considerable growth in the number of automation and robotics companies providing solutions, from warehouse robotics to depalletizing, repalletizing, and order picking and fulfillment robots. So let's take a closer look at some of these sectors and the impact that COVID-19 has had on the businesses that operate in them, and by association, the impact the pandemic has had on the automation and robotics business. So automotive and aerospace. Already impacted from disruption due to megatrends in green vehicles, hybrid and electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, and digitization, COVID-19 is disruption beyond comprehension. Production is disrupted, supply chain is disrupted, but more importantly, the customer base is disrupted. The simple fact is that people are not buying new cars. In Ireland and the UK, demand for cars has fallen by a jaw-dropping 97% in April, a trend that is replicated right across the world. Automotive production in Europe is expected to decline by more than 26% in 2020 and globally by more than 20%. And it has been predicted that it could take up to 10 years to return to 2019 levels. Capital investment in automation and robotics by Tier 1 and automotive OEMs has suffered as a direct result, with orders falling in excess of 30% to date. Aerospace is among the industries worst affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, with air travel decimated practically overnight. Boeing have had 258 cancellations of the 737 MAX in March and April. Airbus have had 66 cancellations up to the end of April and have cut their production capacity by a third. All other aircraft manufacturers are seeing order cancellations and deferrals. The Airbus and Rolls-Royce FAN-X hybrid electric engine program has been cancelled. Rolls-Royce predict a 50% drop in aircraft engines this year and are already seeking job cuts of 9,000 workers, which amounts to a fifth of the total Rolls-Royce workforce. With the majority of aerospace capex programs postponed or cancelled, the automation and robotics aerospace business has effectively dried up too. Electronics. So while demand for computing hardware to facilitate home working has increased due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the demand for consumer electronics has fallen. China, the home of electronics manufacturing, saw a drop of almost 15% in electronics exports in January and February as production stopped. The disruption by the coronavirus to the Chinese electronics and wider manufacturing sectors has been causing a major rethink for the global supply chain. And this is a topic I will come back to later in the presentation. Healthcare, life sciences and medical device. This sector has been impacted significantly by the COVID-19 pandemic, though perhaps not as predictably as you might expect, despite the headline value of exports I mentioned earlier. The soaring demand for medical-grade PPE and COVID-19 treatment drugs has resulted in many manufacturers struggling to meet demand. But on the flip side, medical device manufacturers of products that would typically be used for so-called elective surgery have seen the demand for their product fall as hospital wards and staff are redeployed for essential frontline COVID-19 duties, coupled with the reluctance of patients to attend hospitals while the virus remains at large. Many of these plants have repurposed their manufacturing lines to produce the aforementioned PPE, including face masks and visors, and in some cases also for sanitizing products. The life science and medical device manufacturing sectors have traditionally been very manual intensive. However, in recent years, it has been investing heavily in automation and robotics, and in the main, COVID-19 has had little negative impact on this investment, and would most likely see a surge in demand once a level of control over the virus is found and manufacturing can return to some degree of normality. Consumer goods and general industry. There are also mixed fortunes in consumer goods and general industry. Retail trade in clothes, sports apparel, white goods, consumer electronics, luxury goods, etc. has fallen off a cliff edge, with shopping outlets being closed, and although online retail sales have increased, there is a shortage of supply, with manufacturers having been closed for so long. Food producers, however, are struggling to keep up with the demand and are maintaining production as an essential service, even though that has its own challenges, as we know from the high number of COVID-19 infection clusters in the meat processing industry, both here in Ireland but also right across the world. Some companies in these sectors will struggle to survive, particularly smaller, less financially secure companies. However, other companies will prosper, particularly those that have already embraced automation and those companies that are planning to. Logistics and order fulfillment. With the closure of shops and retail outlets, e-commerce has increased significantly and is struggling to meet the demand for a number of reasons. Product is in short supply due to manufacturing plants being closed. Logistics and fulfillment centres are labour intensive, and they have also had to restructure to ensure safety for their employees, while many have been forced to close during the worst of the pandemic. The transport systems, land, sea and air, are severely impacted, and delivery times are extended for all but the most essential products. Companies such as Amazon have invested heavily in mobile robotics for their own use, while companies such as Swisslog, which is a shameless plug because they are a KUKA company, they provide mobile robotics, depalletizing, repalletizing robots, and order picking and fulfillment robots to the open market, from pharmaceutical to automotive to food distribution and all areas of logistics. Already a strong growth market, this too is likely to see an upsurge in demand post-COVID-19. I mentioned earlier that I would come back to the topic of global supply chain. The disruption to the global supply chain has highlighted some of the weaknesses in the model of offshoring manufacturing to low-cost countries such as China. This has affected all areas and all sectors of manufacturing right across the board, but the most publicly identifiable face of disruption has been in the supply of essential PPE and medicines needed for the healthcare sector during the pandemic. Many countries are now encouraging their manufacturing companies to reshore their contract manufacturing, and some countries, for example Japan, are offering significant financial incentives to the tune of €2 billion to make this happen. And although not directly due to COVID-19, many well-known Japanese brands, including Honda, Casio and Canon, have already made the move, stating clearly that the reshoring is only possible with extensive automation and robotics. Mr. Trump, too, has been saber-rattling about US companies needing to reshore, and that might have some negative impact for Irish industry. The idea of reshoring is attractive, but it can't be forgotten that companies offshored in the first place to improve competitiveness. And just as in other countries, automation and robotics is essential for companies in Ireland that do reshore in order to stay competitive. Opportunities. Post-COVID-19 will undoubtedly present a new normality for those manufacturers that managed to survive the economic crisis that the virus has created. Companies have been investing in robotics and automation for many years now, but for one reason only, and that's return on investment. If the investment does not promise to generate greater efficiencies, increase yield, safer working environments, higher quality and cost competitiveness, then the investment simply will not be made. The fact is, though, that correctly defined and applied automation and robotics can provide all these returns and is now more important than ever. With the appropriate deployment of automation and robotics, industries can ensure that their factories can continue to produce at certain levels with reduced labour content and in many cases with remote monitoring. Many companies have already embraced Industry 4, including robotics and automation, and many others have embarked on the early stages of that journey, believing that it has become a necessity for competitiveness, that there are efficiency and financial gains to be made, but not really knowing where to start, and perhaps not having the deeper pockets that many large multinational companies have in order to invest with. But many of these companies too are quickly realizing in the wake of COVID-19 that Industry 4 is no longer a toolbox for efficiency, but a lifeline for survival. In many of the photographs I have shown this morning, there is a common thread, and that is of large-scale manual labour in close proximity to one another. Post-COVID-19 manufacturing cannot continue in this manner. Sufficient distance must be maintained between operators, and that has significant impact on the size of manufacturing and processing lines, and the knock-on effect it has in increased floor space, and in the case of Lifesciences, clean room space, all of which means increased costs for the business. The appropriate deployment of automation and robotics helps ensure the distance between operators while increasing efficiency and reducing costs, and all within the same footprint or even smaller. There are also opportunities in both healthcare and personal care robotics, including robots for cleaning and sanitizing, and robots as assistants in retirement homes and residential care facilities. Many companies have already been investing in this space, but the speed of adoption has now gone up considerably. Of course, there exist barriers and challenges. Businesses need to be incredibly agile to manage both the costs of scaling down production, followed by the working capital constraints to then rebuild those production levels as economies recover. Changing or adapting operational models can be expensive, and the likelihood is that companies with strong financial resources will be the fastest to respond and take advantage of any market shift, which makes it critical that support measures are put in place to support SMEs to make the transition. Restructuring of the workforces and reskilling and upskilling of many will also be a priority for companies in the new manufacturing norm. Balance sheets are under pressure, but capital investment will be required. Governments must step up and provide working capital support programs. Banks and finance houses must design innovative and affordable loan and leasing packages. State agencies such as the IDA and Enterprise Ireland need to invest even more in the support infrastructure needed to assist manufacturing companies invest in Industry 4 technologies, such as robotics, data analytics, IIoT, and digitization. Advanced manufacturing centres such as the IMR, Confirm, and the new IDA Advanced Manufacturing Centre will become increasingly important, both at multinational and SME levels. There is a serious shortage of skilled resources that are needed for companies to implement and maintain these technologies, and that is across the board, from the machine builders to the end users. The government has been supporting the education sector in recent years to address this skills gap, but now more than ever, this support needs to intensify, and more programs created within our universities, colleges, ITs, and enterprise training boards. Unless we forget Brexit, the UK government has threatened high tariffs on food imports for Ireland if a trade deal is not reached with the EU. And there is increasing concern at EU level that the UK may decide to leave without a deal and take one single combined economic hit with Brexit and COVID-19 together, rather than having a second economic shock due to Brexit after the COVID-19 economic crisis. To summarise, the way we have worked in the past has changed beyond recognition. Companies that have already automated their production lines have been much better placed to remain in production, even if not at full capacity. Those companies with a high reliance on manual labour have been impacted the most, as measures to protect our workers meant that the majority of our factories have had to close. Many businesses are already preparing plans for the automation of their processes to protect them against potential future global disruptions, and to provide agility and flexibility to adapt in times of disruption, whether that be to scale up or down or repurpose. Automation and robotics are central to these plans. And on that note, I would like to thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, I am happy to take those now. Thank you.
Orange Intelligenz.